Can I ask you a question? Karthika, is that right?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, where are you located?
I'm in Sri Lanka, Colombo.
I'm sorry, where?
In Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka.
Yeah. So yeah. Sri Lanka and Delhi. Okay, thank you.
All right. So let me make a quick introduction, Dr. Campbell. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to those of you who are joining us from across the world today. A very happy New Year to you as well. We are delighted and especially honored to have with us Dr. Colin Campbell, a prolific contributor to the science of human health for over 60 years. His groundbreaking China study, one of the most comprehensive studies of health and nutrition ever conducted, and the book he co-wrote, the China study, Startling Implications for Diet, Weight Loss, and long-term health, has sold over 3 million copies. He's also the author of the New York Times bestseller Whole, the Low-Carb Fraud, and the just-released book, The Future of Nutrition. Several documentary films feature Dr. Campbell and his research, including Forks Over Knives, Eating You Alive, Food Matters, and PlantPure Nation. Welcome to Pandemic Panditry, Dr. Campbell.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, indeed.
Yeah, it's been quite a shock that you are on our show. It's a huge honor. We're huge fans of your work. So just wanted to kind of kick off things by asking you, I think, 2020 has been a remarkable year for humanity. It's one way of describing it, I guess. Upon quiet reflection, what was the one thing that stands out for you from this past year?
Well, of course, the pandemic as obviously stands out for, I guess, all of us. Yes. We have another problem in the United States also. I don't need to talk about that, but we've had a terrible president.
Yes.
But we're going to make change. We're making changes. But on the pandemic, what stood out for me is that our solution to the pandemic. Well, let me back up just for a second. The way it was handled in this country was poor, very poor. That was a political question, I think, more than anything. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, in India, I noticed that the number of cases per capita is far less.
Far less, yes.
Far, far less. And in fact, I would like to make that part of our conversation because I would like to know your views. Why is it so much less?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we are asking ourselves that question to some extent because we look at all the chaos that's happening in Western Europe, in Brazil, in the US, and we were very concerned. I know in March and April we had a severe lockdown. Everybody stayed in. Everybody, even now, still wears masks. If you travel in your own car without a mask, the police pulls you over and gives you a fine in your own car. So, really? So you essentially, if you step outside the house, you're supposed to wear a mask no matter what. And there's no sort of, ifs and then buts about it, right? So that's just the law. So that I think has helped. And I think I'm wondering whether we have natural immunity to sort of to viruses because we're sort of constantly plagued by them, all kinds of things. People here don't, for example, take the flu vaccine. Most everybody here has got BCG vaccination. Is also a younger population in general. So I think there's a lot of those factors have helped. And I think even when patients do get sick, there is less practice of defensive medicine. So when you do go to a hospital and you're serious enough, they throw everything but the kitchen sink at you, right? So whatever drugs that they think work, they pile it on. And that seems to help a lot of people sort of survive without having to sort of wait for various approvals and lobbies or whatever else. So that seems to be also helpful. And I think people generally, I'm very impressed by the hygiene and the people who are washing hands, and even the poorest of the poor are aware of this and are deathly afraid because they know that there is not a huge support system to help them. So they've taken pretty good care of themselves as well. I think that's a testament to the people here. So I think when it's all done and written, Africa also has similar numbers. It'll be interesting to figure out why the disparity in the mortality rates between certain parts of the world and then other parts of the world. It could also be that our diets are different. And that would be an interesting question for us to ponder with you.
Well, that's the question I thought that I would like to raise. Namely, your diets are different,
Yes.
on a national scale. And the vast majority of the population is substantially different from what it is in Europe and the U.S., for example.
Yes, that is for sure.
And we have data from China. You know about our study in China, of course.
Yeah.
We did that study again the second time. That's not part of the book.
Okay.
But the second time, we had about 9,000 people. We actually surveyed the dietary conditions in all the original 130 counties in China, together with another 8 in China plus 32 in Taiwan.
Oh, wow.
So I actually organized a joint project between China, the mainland China, and the Taiwanese, which was quite an exciting thing to do.
That's a diplomatic coup in its own.
That was about 30 years ago. That was during the 1980s. And so it was a joint project with the University of Oxford and Cornell University, and of course our colleagues in Taiwan and mainland China. In any case, it was the second round that we did in 1989, that we also collected information on a viral disease there. In fact, it's the most significant viral disease in the world. It's hepatitis B virus causing liver cancer. You may know that.
Yes.
And it kills more people than any other virus, including the coronavirus.
Wow.
Okay. Its mode of transmission is different, but nonetheless, all the viruses actually are subjected to the immune system that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the immune system, if it's good, can handle a lot of these viruses. It uses different mechanisms, obviously. It's a very complex system, but the beauty of the immune system is it's very adaptable. It's adaptable to different viruses. And all the viruses, they have different symptoms. We know that.
Mm-hmm.
They have different degrees of transmissibility or transmission. And so that we have some and different ways of, that. But we collected information, a lot of nutritional information in that second study on the factors that lead to viral activity and liver cancer, by the way.
Okay.
What we found was absolutely spectacular. We looked at the correlation between various nutritional factors that had to do with the consumption of plant-based foods on one hand and animal-based foods on the other. And I have to tell you, I've never seen data like this before. This is all highly significant, statistically speaking. If you're familiar with statistics, it's at the level of P001.
Wow.
I only limited myself to the analysis of that information. In any case, here's what we saw. The higher the consumption of plant foods, the higher the prevalence of viral antibody.
Wow.
Very remarkable. The higher the consumption of plant, the higher the consumption of antibody. Okay, and when in that setting, there was no relationship with liver cancer, which is the symptom of that virus. In contrast, the higher the consumption of animal foods, and it was actually a very small amount compared to Western standards. It's only on average about 10% of what we consume here.
Right.
But nonetheless, the higher the consumption of animal food in that study, the higher the level of antigen, not antibody.
Antigen.
In other words, consume more animal food, less antibody, more antigen. That in turn was highly correlated with liver cancer. So liver cancer, which is the product of the virus, is a product of animal food consumption. And in contrast, those consuming more plants, obviously, they did not get the liver cancer, and they had antibodies. It is so clear. And I had a total of 12 different correlations, if you can believe it. 12
Wow.
different correlations involving close to 9,000 people.
Wow.
So this is very robust, very, very powerful data. And so it just simply shows that, in my mind at least, it shows that the effective diet is not only good for reducing degenerative diseases like heart disease and cancer and so forth and so on. It's not only, it's also good for better physical performance. But now, from these data, it also works on viral diseases as well.
Wow.
And I think that's extremely exciting because what that says for the coronavirus, which goes through the same immune system, as I said, maybe different mechanisms, obviously, and so forth and so on. Our bodies that's the way nature works. Our bodies in a natural setting is able to adapt. And it just makes common sense on the one hand. I doubt that the body would, let's say, would decide to, if I can say it this way, I doubt that nature would decide to use plants to create an immunity for one kind of virus
and not for the other.
In an active situation for another kind. That wouldn't happen. That's
Right.
crazy.
Yes.
So what happens with the hepatitis virus, even though it's a very different virus, I'm suggesting the same thing would happen with coronavirus. So in India, I'm thinking India, Vietnam, I got some data on this. India, Vietnam, Thailand, South Korea. I'm speaking with a group in South Korea tomorrow. South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, all of these Southeast Asian countries, which are much more inclined to be consuming, as you know,
Yes.
much more plant-based foods.
Yes.
It's a huge advantage. I think that
Okay.
is a huge advantage. And, and when you look at the basic biochemistry, the way these things work and how nutrients work in the body, I'm arguing that the way we have looked at it is incorrect. We tend to focus on one nutrient at a time. That's not really the way it goes. All the nutrients are working together in a holistic way, to actually create the effect at the cellular level.
Right.
And also the physiological level. So I think I don't know. I'm maybe going out on a limb, but it's not the first time I went out on a limb in my life. So, but I'm suggesting that this is the solution for resolving the coronavirus problem.
Wow, Dr. Campbell. I mean, that's fascinating because I know here in India, ever since the onset of this virus, people have made a conscious effort to change their diets and eat what they consider immunity boosting foods, right? So, and they tend to be mostly plant-based, right? So,
Right.
so that I mean definitely is happening, right? So, I mean, I think people to sort of restock, and then of course the McDonald's were closed, the KFCs were closed, right? So essentially, they mostly had home cooked food, which even the busiest of people sometimes skip. So even the upper middle class or the middle class were compelled to stay at home, were compelled to make their own food, and were eating simpler food without the lots of the processed stuff, right? So the delivery services were all closed down, so you had to sort of fend for yourself, and that may have actually caused people to eat cleaner than they would normally, in addition to
yes.
So I think you're onto something there for sure. I mean, I think there's, and I know that certain physicians here in India have been actually advocating, looking carefully at your diet, eating things that boost your immunity, gives your body a fighting chance, and I think that may be a significant contributor.
I think it's a major. I think you're being very modest. I think it's a major contributor.
Yeah, I think. I mean, it's definitely worth studying. It's definitely worth studying.
There is also, Larry and Dr. Campbell, a major subculture in these countries of drinking herbal drinks, right? Plant-based drinks like tea and coriander and cinnamon and all of that stuff, which also, according to doctors, help boost your immunity.
Yeah.
Right. Well, those things that you just mentioned, of course, they're plant-based.
Yes.
Correct.
Exactly.
Yes.
Correct.
So, I mean, I would quite agree with you. I think, That's likely to be true. I mean, you can find certain, certain foods that parts of plants, that may have special properties in that regard, but more or less doing the same thing.
So,
Yeah.
Dr. Campbell, something I was really sort of interested in asking you. I think we've read a lot of your work and listened to a lot of the movies that you've sort of featured on. And I know you've received like over 70 grant years of peer-reviewed research funding, mostly from the National Institutes of Health. You've served on grant and review panels of multiple funding agencies. Actively participated in the development of national and international nutrition policy, and authored, I think, over 300 research papers. Can you list for us 5 things that the world has gotten wrong about diet and nutrition? I know the list may be longer than 5, but I was thinking 5 might be a good starting point.
Well, I'm discussing that in the new book,
The Future of
Nutrition. I give some very specific examples. And I'm talking about nutritional examples in this case.
Yes.
We can also talk about socioeconomic problems too.
Okay.
But in any case, in the new book, what the new book started when, believe it or not, it started many years ago. Also, when I spent 1 year at Oxford University in England, and at that time I was getting a lot of pushback from my community, and so it was very nasty, and it was clearly coming from the corporate sector, from the livestock industry, the pharmaceutical industry, and so I decided to go into the libraries in London and in Oxford and try to find out, is there something in our history that would account for this extraordinary, debate or argument, if you will. And I found something that was very exciting, I must tell you. And that's what the book is about. I'm in the 1800s, for example, there was a discussion at that time about what were the causes of cancer. And there were 2 theories. One theory was called the constitutional nature of cancer. What that referred to was the fact that somehow the whole body was involved in this, which of course would include food too.
Right.
That was one theory as to what causes cancer. The other theory was, and this was promoted by the surgeons, the other theory, they said, no, cancer is a local disease, which means, in fact, that when the cancer occurs, you can just cut it out. I mean, that was their preference. And so, but at the same time, that idea of a local disease then gradually changed. Well, it didn't change. Between the constitutional nature of disease, which is sort of like the Ayurvedic principle in the India and Sri Lanka, if you will,
Yes.
or also, on the one hand, that was one idea. The other idea was this, as I say, this very local theory. The local theory of disease is basically a form of reductionism. One thing at a time. Whether it's one nutrient, maybe it's one mechanism, maybe it's one disease. So that's been a huge. I would argue that's a huge mistake that we've made in science, in medicine, over the last 150 years, because it was the local theory of disease that was adopted by the corporate sector in the late 1800s in the West, at least. As we were moving toward an industrial, so-called industrial revolution, technology was going to be the answer to everything. We discovered radiation, we discovered chemotherapy, we discovered all these chemicals and things like this. That is a product of the local theory of disease theory. That's what became the adopted practice in Western countries. That became the adopted preferred practice to be able to solve health problems by just focused on one nutrient as a cause, for example, and also focused on one drug as a solution.
Like a statin.
And so the effect that had was to push aside nutrition. And so nutrition as a concept was never fully adopted. And in the West, again, institutions, and when I say institutions, I'm referring to corporate institutions as well as professional associations.
Right.
They're working together, and eventually the government itself.
Right. All three.
So you had government, you had academia, you had corporate sector, all sort of adopting the same general idea that the way to solve human problems, health problems, was through the use of drugs. And we got away from food because food, as you know, and in the case of food, there was one predominant point of view, and that was that we also should be consuming more protein. And that meant protein from animal foods, okay? It's not that the protein by itself, does all the damage. Yes, it does some damage, the protein by itself. But the more important part of that argument, or that practice, I should say, as we're consuming more animal food in order to get that good protein, we consume less plant foods. So it's a combination. Just the mere decision of consuming animal food to get the protein means we're consuming less plant foods. That's exactly what we're seeing now in China with those data from the coronavirus. So all of a sudden, it really hangs together. So your history in India, and of course your current day practices, I guess, to a great extent, but your history in India, the history in China, and of course in other Eastern countries. In the Western countries, there was some of that history too, but was with the Native Americans,
right,
or the Indians, if we
right.
called them Indians.
Yeah, I know. Native Americans.
Word, but in any case, that's who they were, the indigenous peoples in all the countries of the world. They were the ones that had the best answer.
So, Dr. Campbell, interesting point there. I mean, we are seeing with rising affluence in, even in India, Sri Lanka, in this part of the world, meat consumption is going up. So the number of vegetarians keep dropping every year. The number of meat eaters keep going up. No one's eating the meat in the quantities or the frequency that we see in the West or in the US, right? But it's catching up, right? People are eating. It's sort of a badge of honor of affluence that you eat more meat. And so, we have some startling numbers, that, even in India. So 1 in 6 diabetics in the world are Indian. 1/3 of Indians die from cardiovascular disease and stroke. Now, there's also an interesting sort of data point that I want you to sort of opine on. India is also the largest producer and consumer of dairy products. Do you see a correlation between those two things? Because some people will say, no, we've been drinking milk for thousands of years, and it shouldn't bother us.
No,
this
you're
dairy thing
absolutely
is the Western thing.
There is a correlation. There's an association. It's the same sort of scientific mindset to some extent, because milk, of course, maybe not necessarily for those who are not thinking about it this way, but milk is a source of animal-based protein. Right. And the animal-based protein is having the same effect as the protein from other animal-source foods. It was actually the protein of milk, as you may recall from my book, my research.
Right.
It was the milk protein that, the protein of milk that was the problem. And incidentally, this brings me back to India again. Mm-hmm. As you may recall in the book that I wrote, I was at the time working in the Philippines.
Okay.
With, working on the question concerning malnutrition of children. And what I saw, I thought, especially thanks to my medical colleagues in the Philippines, was the fact that the children who were consuming the most protein, like we do in the West, mm-hmm. and there were very few, a very small number of families. Those who are consuming more protein, they had the children more likely to get liver cancer. And at the same time, and that was just an impression. There was no real, I had some data, yes, but the reason I got onto that idea because I had an interest in liver cancer at that time. And I thought liver cancer was, and all of us did, we thought liver cancer was primarily due to aflatoxin, the
Okay.
mold toxin. But I had some reservations about that. But nonetheless, we were focused on aflatoxin. And then I thought I had this impression that no, it's not only the aflatoxin, which is a mutagen, it causes mutations. It's not only the aflatoxin, it's the nutrition of the protein, maybe, that was involved. Then there was a paper, and this is 1968. There was a paper from India, Mahadavan and Gopalan, by name. They were at Hyderabad.
Yes.
And they published a paper that showed that in experimental rats, the rats given more protein, they got liver cancer. You may remember that.
Yes, I remember that from your study. Correct.
Yeah, so it was the combination of the Indian work, in experimental animals, together with my impressions of the children in the Philippines that gave rise to my research.
Wow.
So I came home and I got the NIH grant and so forth. You know the rest of the story.
Right.
I wanted to know, I was not inclined to believe that because I'm coming from a farm, milking cows.
Right.
And I'm drinking a lot of milk and so forth. And so I didn't particularly want to believe that. But in any case, when we got into but we had a problem. Do we give these children more protein in the form of, let's say, dairy protein?
Mm-hmm.
Or do we not? So that we had to do the research. And so I started doing the research. That was essentially my career. And coming back to your question concerning dairy.
Right.
The dairy, if it's fresh, reasonably fresh, I would argue, is a big problem. It's very problematic. The only kind of dairy product that might, let's say, not be as bad, I'm not sure it's necessarily healthy, but it would be the fermented products,
Okay.
like yogurt.
Okay.
Yes, if it's fermented, it might be less of a problem. I don't want to say it's a health product, but
Right.
I'm suggesting that maybe it's not as bad. So when you say that in India you're using more dairy,
Yes.
is that the form of cheese or liquid milk or what?
No, actually, it's a form of liquid milk and also yogurt or dahi, as we call it. And just to give you a number, I'm actually familiar with this number. India consumes $15.53 billion worth of yogurt a year.
Well, you see, your yogurt. I don't know about the yogurt question. I just don't know. But
Yeah,
I
they
think
consume lots of other dairy. So the whole consumption of dairy is some $80 billion, right? So yogurt's about less than
right. Well, you of course, as you were saying, diets are changing in India and I guess Sri Lanka as well.
Yeah.
So in any case, the diets are changing.
It has.
You're seeing more heart disease.
Yep.
Yep.
More diabetes, more heart disease, more cancer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So-
your diabetes rates might be a little bit different. I think that it certainly is going to be propelled by that diet as well. But in the case of diabetes, it also might be some contribution from the excessive refined sugars.
Correct. That's also
We'll certainly do that too.
Yeah.
So that combination of, more animal food, more, if you will, processed foods in the form of sugar or refined carbohydrates is a problem. Yes.
So, Dr. Campbell, speaking of refined sugars and animal protein and all of that, people being overweight and obesity was obviously considered to be a high-income country problem, right? But over 70% of the world's 2 million kind of overweight population live in the low or middle-income countries. Does that number surprise you?
No. I'm sorry, maybe I'm missing the question. Does that degree of obesity surprise me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, if that's the question, no. We at the same time of changing our diets, worldwide, to some extent, that usually goes along with quite frankly, less physical activity, less physical work. So I think the idea of having exercise is important. I mean, we know that,
right?
So we're sitting around in offices like we're doing right now, and that sort of thing. Instead of going out and working in the fields and doing some of that kind of work too, or just routine exercise. So,
Dr. Campbell, there's a comment from the audience that says, diet tailored for your health makes a huge difference to health and outcomes. I guess you would tend to agree. I think this concept of lots of doctors, as you described, are very conveniently, towing the pharma line and prescribing pills for every ailment, and it seemed to have forgotten the power of the food that we eat as a medicine, right? And I think doctors probably need to relearn or actually sort of understand the connection between our health and nutrition. It's something that maybe they're not getting trained in med school. I think that's probably true. You've mentioned that bit before as well, right? There's very little or scant information or training around nutrition, even for medical doctors.
Absolutely. I mean, in this country, I think there's maybe 250 medical schools or something like that. There's not one that teaches nutrition.
Not one.
Not one. So, and what, some of them have some lectures on nutrition, but it's the wrong kind of nutrition. It's focused on one nutrient at a time, number one. Number two, it tends to actually value the consumption of protein again.
Okay.
The same question. So, in effect, there's no nutrition. It's just simply not taught. And I would argue that there's a reason for that. There's sort of a philosophical, actually turns out economic reason for that. That is, Western medicine is focused on the local theory of disease idea, wherein, we value, let's say, drugs. It's a very specific chemical treating a very specific disease, if you will. And each disease is supposedly different. So therefore, the opportunity for making drugs is the sky is the limit in terms of those kinds of things. And the reason that we turn to that is, quite frankly, that leads into the economic system. It makes money. And we can sell drugs. We can sell drugs. We can make a market out of those products if, in fact, we can protect the intellectual property. So their intellectual property laws, for example, come into play. If we can, have patents, copyright laws, trademark laws, these kind of things to protect intellectual property, and in a free market system, then there's a perfect environment for actually creating the use of drugs to solve health problems. So unfortunately, I'm not sure if people plan it this way, but unfortunately, the more sick people we have, the better that suits the industry.
Right.
And so, why would they want to treat nutrition? Coming back to the question concerning nutrition. Nutrition is not part of the medical program, because that would enable people to solve their problems through nutrition. And would destroy the industry. So all of a sudden now we're into a socioeconomic kind of discussion. And I would say a socioeconomic political kind of discussion.
Yeah. Because
the political forces are only primarily representing the corporate sector.
Right.
So yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm just going back to what you said, Dr. Campbell, about the Indian system. So I think we've some comments by audience as well that, in contrast to Western medicine, Ayurveda, has had a very sort of high onus on diet and nutrition as a part of its, cure, right, or its treatment of disease. And it also has, I think, a more holistic view, the constitution concept that you introduced, instead of the local concept. And maybe, this movement that you've spearheaded in the West, and other doctors have now sort of seen the light and gotten on board, is about sort of going back to that idea of treating the Constitution, right, as the body as a system, as opposed to a body as a small reduced part, right? So it's
Right.
not just about your cholesterol and having a $35 billion statin industry that comes out of that, and the two have really never, I mean, now they're saying the statins don't really work. They're just a marketing ploy. But whatever the case is, I think that you outlined just now, this whole economic dependency, socioeconomic factors. So why do how do people circumvent that? How do people get informed and start taking back their own health into their own hands through nutrition?
Boy, that is the number one question. I mean, I think about that a lot in the United States, because here the corporate sector and the government sector, and unfortunately the academic community itself, which is dependent to some extent on that, they're sort of holding hands, and basically they're pushing the idea of technological solutions to medical problems. And in which case, nutrition is not taken as nearly as seriously. So, in the development of national policy, the national guidelines, for example, I was very active in that for about 20 years intensively some years ago, and I saw firsthand how national policy is developed. In some ways, I was almost part of it, but I could see. As I say firsthand, exactly the kind of things that go on, when we're holding hands between those two different groups. It's a very powerful coalition, exceptionally powerful coalition, who have gotten very rich. Obviously, they're the ones that have the wealth. And when an organization like that, or let's say a coalition of organizations like that, when their centerpiece is wealth. And so therefore, once they have the wealth, they want to protect their institutions. So what do? They control knowledge. They have the power, and power means, controlling the knowledge.
Yeah.
And so what do? They essentially control the knowledge by deciding, what does the public get to know? Or what, and becomes very proactive. In other words, our government, for example, in the formulation of dietary policy, our government will tend to proactively repress information of my kind. Because they just simply say, oh, that doesn't count. What is, they'll even say things like, that's not science, or something of that sense, which begs the question, what is science? Science in the West has become a study has been a platform for reductionism. And if you don't do things in a very precise way like that, unfortunately, some people think that's not science. When my argument is that, wait a minute, that's not the way nature works. Nature works in a very holistic way. Like you in the eastern part of the world, or in the eastern countries, if you will, you sort of maintain some of that understanding.
Right.
You maintain some of that understanding. And so, it all comes, all of a sudden it comes full circle. Whether we're talking about science or really down to the level of cells and, physiology, or whether we're talking about different diseases, whatever the case may be, we're all talking the same thing. And what we have as humans, we have actually presumed that we're somehow superior to nature, rather than being more aware of the fact that we are nature. And so we've kind of pushed that aside, and we're going to now develop technological solutions to all of our problems. So how do you, to go back to your question again, in this country, I would say, for example, that the U.S. government, and this maybe could apply to in India, if you will, Sri Lanka, I would argue that the government, the extent to which they provide resources for medical education, they should withhold those resources unless the medical institutions agree to teach nutrition. And it's full meaning. If they don't want to do that, then they don't get any federal support. And that's a mechanism. Number one. Number two, and this is particularly pertinent to Western countries like the United States. I don't know about India in this case, but here, doctors are compensated for their services, right, according to which kind of disease they're diagnosing, which kind of diagnosis they may be giving to their patients, and so forth. That's how they get compensated. And then we have a system of 130 medical specialties, for example, in the United States. It's about something like that. And so they check it off with a ICD code or CPT code, and that's how they get compensated. Among those 130 specialties, not one is nutrition.
Oh, wow.
So doctors are not able to be compensated in a capitalistic system like we have. Doctors are not able to be compensated for nutritional advice.
So it goes down to dollars and cents pretty much there.
Yeah, come down to dollars and cents.
Yeah.
And so, and it's one of the reasons we have this debate in Western, like the United States, we argue a great deal about, it's very political. We argue whether we should keep the current medical system, whether it should be, they call it socialistic, or whether it should be capitalistic.
Right.
That's the issue.
Right.
That's the issue. And I think that having a medical system that serves all people makes sense, because I believe that I think having human health is a right. It's not a privilege.
Correct.
Yeah.
Agreed. Karthika, we have some questions from the audience also, right?
Yeah, there's an interesting question that has come through, Dr. Campbell, from Anjana. Anjana, thanks for joining us today. What are your views on raw veganism and fasting?
Well, I don't use the word veganism, quite frankly, because that word, is this fair enough? I mean, those who chose veganism, a lot of the people who chose veganism in the first place had to do with animal welfare. It was an ethical question. That's fair enough. I mean, I'm not challenging that idea. All I'm saying is that when people made their choices for that reason, they tended to limit their choices just to that, as if that's going to be the solution. It's not the solution, because the problem we have is far, far larger than that. Now it's a question concerning environments, questions of, all sorts of things. So I don't use the word vegan very, very much. That's my first part of my answer.
Right.
I'd rather call it, that's why I came up with that word, whole food plant-based, just to avoid that sort of interpretation. And you were asking the question, Karthika, you said that the woman was asking, what's the connection between veganism and
fasting, intermittent fasting.
Fasting, yeah. Fasting, that's, you're more familiar with that, I think, in India than we have been in the West. But fasting is now becoming. I have a good friend who has probably the best fasting clinic in the United States. And in fact, I myself did that 3 times for quite some time, up to 14 days the first time, and that was because I had a problem, a toxicological problem, working with a very poisonous chemical. But in any case, that's neither here nor there. The fasting idea, I think, is a good idea. Water-only fasting, and depending, if one has a problem of some sort and they can't really quite solve it, the way it works here is that fasting, water-only fasting, maybe juice fasting, but water-only fasting certainly, is a worthwhile thing to do to allow the body to recover itself and to help resolve the problem it has. And then once that period is coming to an end, then gradually shift into the consumption of plant-based foods. So I see fasting as being possibly a therapeutic it has therapeutic value, and I'm sure that's known around the world as already. It does have therapeutic value, but here in the West, we're having to relearn that lesson again, and so I think fasting is it's probably a good thing, especially for certain conditions.
It's like a reset button for your body from a nutrition perspective.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Exactly right.
We have
It's a
another
reset.
question for you, Dr. Colin. Karthik, you want to ask that? RDA?
Yeah. So this was more a comment, from Aditi. Basically, what she's saying is yogurt, butter, and milk, especially in India and this part of the world, have been shown to be high in use even in like Indian mythology, right? Because Krishna was, spoken of heavily consuming this stuff. So health conditions would have been prevalent since historic times, is the point that she was trying to make, the Indian health conditions.
I'm not sure the echo on your voice is kind of interfering. I'm not sure I heard that very well.
So I think this is a common sort of thing, Dr. Campbell, that when we come across in India, when we suggest that people adopt a whole food plant-based diet and take out dairy from their regular diet, there is sort of a pushback that comes almost automatically, which is, hey, we've been consuming dairy for thousands of years, and if these so-called problems existed for us, they would have manifested, thousands of years ago. And my stock answer to that, and I think many others, is that the quality of milk that was consumed 1,000 years ago is not the same thing. The recent statistics here in India are that 80% of the milk that is consumed here in India is adulterated. So you're not drinking actually milk that was available 1,000 years ago. You're drinking milk that's a far less superior product and is, has been changed dramatically in many ways. The quality of milk is not the same. That is one answer to that question that we sometimes people give. Just keen to understand. I think there's sort of, in your research as well as others, there's a definite scientific evidence, and I know you're an expert in this, to say that milk is actually a toxic thing in your body, and it helps spread cancer throughout your body, and also the saturated fat component. So it's not a healthy thing to consume, I assume, Dr. Campbell.
That's right. I mean, we talked about this a bit before, and I think your point about the modern day milk being different from the milk used in older times, I think that's a good point. We don't know exactly how much difference that might make, but I would add to that too, as I said before, that the milk consumed prior years probably was mostly fermented in one form or another.
Could be.
Maybe not really active fresh milk. I don't know. That's the question.
Yeah, most milk today is pasteurized as well. Yeah, that is true. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so in the olden days, they I don't. Did they use fresh milk? Let's say in 1,000 years ago.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, fresh milk.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
And
I don't know how copious the quantities were. I mean, whether they had
right
or whatever,
And it may have been more goats and so forth too, along with it.
Yeah, true. Karthika, we had another
question about RDA from Spotify. So basically what they're saying is RDA for Americans is for healthy people, not for those who are unhealthy. And what's your take on that, Dr. Campbell?
Well, that's a good question. The RDA that was established in this country, at least, it was established first time in 1943, quite a long time ago. And what they did at that time was they were using healthy males and testing just simply to determine how much nitrogen these individuals needed. And so they determined on the basis of nitrogen, to be honest about it, which is protein. And that gave a figure of and that somewhere around 5 or 6% of total calories was required minimum amount, and then they increased it by 2 standard deviations, which gave a level of about 9 to 10% of total calories. That became the RDA, just for background. And that was considered to be the number to use for public policy, that we should consume at least 9 to 10% protein. That has stood the test of time. It's still the same, 9 to 10% protein. But in reality, because of this enthusiasm for the value of protein, the average population have ended up now consuming around 17 to 18%, not 8 to 9%. And all the extra protein is coming from basically from animal foods. So it sort of begs the question. It begs the question in my mind, whether plants have enough protein, and do they have the right kind? And so, quite frankly, plants, the whole foods, they have all the protein we need. That's number one. There's 2 parts to this question. And so the plants have all the protein we need. And if that means consuming diets only with 8 or 9% protein, that's enough. That's enough. That's close to almost being ideal. Plants can have a lot of extra protein sometimes too, with legumes and so forth. But that's okay too, because the whole plant's got a lot of everything's working together, so it's fine. Coming back to whether it's sick people or healthy people, like your questioner was just asking, the data I just gave to you is based on healthy people. And as far as sick people are concerned, I don't see any difference. Their requirement for protein is going to be the same. We don't need extra protein, certainly not from animal foods. That's for certain. If people feel that they're low on protein, it's hard to be low on protein, to be honest about it. I mean, that's where I started my career with children, for example, they were not only low in protein, they were practically starving. In other words, they weren't having enough total calories. So it was a combination of, how do you separate out the caloric effect from the protein effect, if you will. So if people get enough food, we start out with that premise first. Enough food, and make sure it's sort of plant-based. And if they're sick, I'm going to suggest that my best guess is what we've seen so far, that should restore health. Together with, of course, enough water. Obviously, water is always important. So that sort of thing.
So, Dr. Campbell, clarification question, actually, Karthik, and then you ask the next one. Dr. Campbell, so if you were, you talked about hepatitis B, and the connection with animal proteins. So if you were on a plant protein diet and you were eating a lot of plant protein, legumes and, millets and grains and vegetables and everything else, that would be negligible, right? I mean, there wouldn't be any issue of plant protein causing cancer, or would it?
No cancer. No cancer. That's right.
So you can eat as much plant protein as you want. And
that's right.
Okay, I want to clarify.
Absolutely. The more, in that case, almost the more the better.
More the better. Okay.
Yeah. By the way, I talked about cancer because that was my own area, and that's how I sort of learned this. But I should say the same thing applies to heart disease and cholesterol. The chief cause of increases in cholesterol, by the way, is animal protein. That was discovered over 100 years ago, and it was ignored. It was not saturated fat. It was not total fat. It was not cholesterol itself. It was animal protein diets. That's what caused the cholesterol to go up.
Okay. Back to you on the question.
Thanks, no problem. Dr. Campbell, I read with a lot of interest these 8 principles that you kind of outlined in, some of the writing that you've done. And one of those principles really struck out for me, which was, how people blame their genes for their health challenges, right? But you had said genes don't determine diseases on their own, right? That they need to be activated or expressed. And nutrition plays an active or critical role in determining which genes, good or bad, are expressed. Can you sort of elaborate on that a little bit for us, please?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, all of our biological activities or biological expression, observation, whatever you want to say. I mean, they all have a genetic basis. So genes actually is the template. Genes, in many ways, is almost the template for life. And depending on the characteristics of our genes when we're born, we tend to live by that template. But a lot of those genes obviously have to do with things other than height and color of hair and so forth and like that. A lot of those genes, if they're some genes are able to cause ill health or disease, if you will, especially as we go forward in life. If we, for example, have all these genes and we actually cause mutations in some of them going forward, which is caused by, let's say, environmental chemicals and so forth and so on, damaged genes. Those damaged genes then can give rise to cancer, heart disease, a variety of other things. So we're talking about a couple of different kinds of genes. They're the innate normal genes that we're born with, together with sometimes mutated genes. Okay, it's all genes. Everything starts from there. But the fact of the matter is, when we eat the right food, it's controlling the expression of those genes. If we're consuming a whole food plant-based diet, it basically allows the good genes, we've got a lot of good genes, it allows the good genes to be expressed. And at the same time, it suppresses the activity of the bad genes. Really, it's an interesting sort of almost begs the question, what is nature doing? Nature knew something about how to manage our bodies. And so it just kind of plays into
follow-up question. I have a very interesting follow-up question, which is, obviously there's a lot of talk now about inheriting the BRCA gene, right, for breast cancer, and how women who have inherited that gene have a higher percentage of getting breast cancer. So either at a very young age, they opt to remove the breasts, or, go for elective surgeries, things like that. So, but doctor, based on what you're saying, it's really the nutrition that they eat, which is kind of activating the gene that they already have in their body. Is that correct? And then
yes,
there's no need to panic to this extent.
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct. At least that's, and we tested that idea in some various ways in the laboratory, that idea. And yes, to some extent, the dosage of the gene, that is the extent to which these genes, you have a whole lot of genes doing the wrong thing, that can sometimes have a little bit of effect, but it's quite amazing. It's quite amazing that if we're eating the right food, it even keeps under control the genes that are more, let's say, mischievous, or, that are, the nutrition is very powerful. It's exceptionally powerful. And it happens also, I should say, pretty fast.
Really?
That's part of it. We're talking about treatment, not just prevention.
Sorry, Lavin, do you have a question? Because I have an interesting one.
Yeah, I guess so. The questions are now flowing in. So I personally have two friends. One who suffered a stroke recently and is, a mild stroke, but was it's scary enough. Another person whose wife's diagnosed with a cardiac condition that, and I've told both of those individuals to look at reading and getting to know a whole food plant-based diet. And then this goes to the point where you just made, which is this could be a rapid. I mean, using nutrition as medicine is a rapid change. This is not something you have to do for 20 years before you get results, right, Dr. Campbell? Okay, so this could be, this could have the same efficacy and speed of cure as would a pill, or profess as a pill would do. Is that correct?
Absolutely. That's a very important point. And in fact, I think going forward, as far as this discussion is concerned, going forward, the effect of nutrition on treating disease is a very powerful message. We have come to rely on the idea that we treat disease through pills, when in reality, because they supposedly work pretty fast, supposedly because they're very specific, and so forth and so on, but those pills have side effects. They all have side effects. In contrast, if we switch to a whole food plant-based diet, I'll just mention a couple of observations that we know about already.
Okay.
The changes occur within a day or two. It's amazing. Just as fast as yes. I have now some friends. I've got a couple of sons. One is a doctor himself. The other is the one who actually was the director of the movie PlantPure Nation.
Okay.
But in any case, They have, and my colleagues in medicine have. If you take a group of people, let's say, who are at high risk, or they already been diagnosed with heart disease or something like of that sort, or they got other issues, and their cholesterol levels are high. You put them on a diet like this, the cholesterol level will drop precipitously in about 21 to 2 days. It's very fast. That's number one. That's an indication of how fast this nutritional effect works. A second indication is with diabetes. Diabetics, we know, of course, we have type 2 diabetes, we have type 1 diabetes. The type 2 diabetics are sustaining themselves on pills, on insulin, let's say, okay? When they switch their diet to a whole food plant-based diet, it has the immediate effect. It has that the blood sugar goes down and is used more effectively and more efficiently. And in fact, the effect on reducing blood sugar from the diet effect on blood sugar is so strong and so rapid that if they were to continue to take their insulin pills at the same time, some of them can go into a hypoglycemic shock within 1 or 2 days. In other words, the nutritional effect on keeping blood sugar under control is very fast, very prominent, and actually, if it's combined with continuation of the drug, they can get at the problems. So it just leads the solution to that is, okay, take yourself off the pills. And I have now physician friends who are doing exactly that. That is to say, if they switch them to a whole food plant-based diet, I know one fellow in Houston, Texas, he starts off by just stopping the pills even before they start eating the food. It's that fast. And so I'm using those two examples, plus some others, to simply make the argument that the switch to a whole food plant-based diet is a form of medicine. It's very fast. It's very comprehensive. It causes a lot of changes of all kinds. And we can begin to understand that from a physiological and biochemical point of view. And we demonstrated it. So that, to me, is the future of this discussion. Talk to people about the effect of the diet on treating their disease instead of using pills.
Wow. So Dr. Campbell, when you say whole food plant-based diet, just so that everybody is on the same page on this one. Right. So what does that entail? Does that be obviously all fruits, vegetables, pulses, grains that you can eat? Does that also mean no oils, like no olive oil, no plant-based oils, or is that so? If you can, and sugars. So those are the two things I would help clarify.
Yeah. Absolutely, sugar, added oil. I should say refined sugar, added oil, and salt. We know those three things, are addictive. And we can make all kinds of interesting discussions about, why were they addictive? But in any case, let's set that aside. But the fact of the matter is they're quite addictive. And so, they make food taste better, let's say, for a lot of people. And so the problem is when they're using salt and sugar, especially, or oil, added oil, when they're doing that, a little bit in the beginning, yeah, that's kind of nice. I like that. But the first thing you know, then they want more and more and more. And first thing you know, they're having too much refined carbohydrate, too much oil, and they're into problems. So the best thing to do as possible is, just cut it down. Just use the natural sugars in foods, fruits included, no problem. If you use the whole food, the body has a way of incorporating all that good stuff together. It doesn't allow it keeps things under control. So I don't think so. We have this. If you're in a situation where we have some people who are very strict about this, no salt, no added oil, no sugar, so forth, and that's a little bit hard, to say the least. So in my mind, we should minimize. Be aware that if we don't need any, don't use any kind of attitude.
Right.
If we use any, don't use any, and try to get down to that point where we don't need any. We don't even want it. Because when that happens, and we've done this, my wife and I, of course, and others have done this ourselves. We go to that particular point in time, after a month or two, our taste preferences begin to change. And, that addiction wears off. So, we don't have the addiction anymore. So it can reset. We can reset, our preference for food and taste the good taste of the food itself. It's quite remarkable.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think ever since I went vegan, I used to like my steak rare, and now when I go within 20 feet of the meat section of the supermarket, I cringe. I cannot bear the smell. I can't believe I used to eat that, let alone and enjoyed it. I just run away. I can't go to the meat section anymore. It's just not something I would approach anymore. It's just amazing what he does. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, Dr. Campbell, I know we've taken a lot of your time today. Are there any more sort of final questions?
I have one final question. So, Dr. Campbell, with all of this nutrition stuff that we talked about, and you obviously touched upon malnutrition a little bit, there is also this concept that's evolving called hidden hunger, right? Where people look healthy but are deprived of certain nutrients, because we have limited ourselves to certain amount of pulses and certain amount of legumes that we eat. How does the whole food plant-based diet kind of help combat that situation?
Well, I think what you're referring to, or the question is referring to, in part, is whether or not to use nutrient supplements.
In a way, because people look healthy, but in fact, they're not.
Well, there's always that question concerning, how can I improve my the diet a little bit more? And a lot of people turn to supplements, perhaps. That's a problem, because the nutrients, when they're taken out of the food and put into a pill, they can actually sometimes have the opposite effect. So I'm not in favor of nutrient supplements, and I was very deeply involved in that issue way back 35 years ago in Washington, involving the regulations that were being imposed at that time. And I was the one that was in the docket, so to speak, in the courtroom, sort of evaluating the claims that were being made by people. So I got very close to that question. And then we did a lot of research, not me, but a lot of people did research on the use of these nutrient supplements as to whether or not they work or not. And the result of that, about 10, 15 years worth of research, lots of studies, showed that these nutrient supplements really don't have, they certainly are not a substitute for whole food, that's for sure. Whether they might be helpful, adding a little bit of something extra, in a sense, I suppose we can make arguments that they may help a bit for people who insist on consuming a bad diet. If they're consuming a bad diet, the wrong stuff, no plants, so forth and so on, maybe, it might work a little bit. But why would they want to do that when if they change their diet, they get far better effects? So coming back to your question of people don't feel quite so well, they think they're eating the right food and so forth. I think really the whole food idea is pretty powerful. And I would suggest that those people may be coming to rely too much on fabricated foods. Yeah. We call them processed foods sometimes, or convenient foods, or fast foods. These things can be problematic because they're comprised or composed of parts of plants, maybe, but that's still not good enough that they combine it in such a way and then throw in some oil, throw in some sugar, that kind of thing. That's not good nutrition. Okay. And that's one of the reasons for coming back to the whole food idea.
So on sort of parting, I would like to get some sort of parting thoughts on a few things. So one would be this whole, world's talking about keto diets and paleo diets and all that. I think keto is sort of Atkins in a new avatar, right? But what are your thoughts on some of these sort of fad diets that are going around, and people sort of? I know a lot of people are made New Year resolutions to lose weight, so there's probably a pertinent question because people are saying, "How do I lose weight? Let me go and find out the latest fad diet and I'll do it." Intermittent fasting is another. So is keto. So is paleo, right? I think fasting, you said, might be a very good idea.
Yeah, fasting I think probably would be the best idea, maybe, but changing our diet completely. On the keto diet, by the way, as you know, that originally comes from the Atkins diet of the 1970s, and in which case the argument was made that the fat that we gain is really coming from the excess carbohydrates that we were consuming. And so they got to a low carb diet. Low carb diet gave rise to the Atkins diet. The Atkins diet was that, the paleo diet, the zone diet, and so forth and so on. We had in this country a lot of diets like that, or the keto diet. And the keto diet, of various and sundry ways of describing it, is really a diet that is low in refined carbohydrates and much higher in protein and fat. Sure enough, that kind of diet in the short run, if people are already overweight, they go to a keto diet, they will actually decrease the weight. That's pretty uniform. They'll decrease their weight to some extent, and they'll be happy about it. And they'll say, okay, that's the answer. That's exactly what I was looking for. The problem is that kind of diet is very high in protein and fat. First off, that diet will wear off. They won't stay on it usually very long. If they do stay on it, they're going to get heart disease and cancer. So, because that's a high animal protein, high fat diet. So the keto diet is not the way to go by any stretch of imagination, even if they see short-term effects. So coming back to your point, the best way to do that is just concentrate, maybe think a little bit about what am I doing? Eat more of the really good food. Don't use a lot of added oil. That's really key. The added oil tends to be omega-6, pro-inflammatory. That can exacerbate health problems, disease problems. So come back to the fresh food again. Stay with it at least a month, maybe two, if you really force oneself to do that. And then the taste preference will begin to change again. Like you say, you don't want, when you walk past the meat counter, you're offended. You don't want to even touch it.
Yeah.
So it's resetting our taste for food.
Thank you so much, Dr. Campbell. It's been an inspiring conversation, a revealing conversation, and we wanted to sort of kick off the year with drawing even stronger connections between health and nutrition. And hopefully we've sort of inspired and motivated and maybe shocked some people into adapting a whole food plant-based diet as a lifestyle choice as opposed to a fad. And I thank you so much for that. We've decided this year to actually create something called Mindful Mondays, and we are something similar to Meatless Mondays in the US, to say, be mindful of what you put in your body, starting on at least one day a week, like Monday, and take Monday to sort of think through and be mindful of your choices of consumption, be it food or clothing or whatever else you do. So hopefully that'll catch on globally, and people are a little bit more mindful of their choices in their diets, and then that'll lead to better health, and hopefully then pandemics of the sort that we are experiencing won't happen because people will be eating plants. And last time I checked, I didn't see a single pandemic that started from eating a potato or an eggplant.
That is right. Yeah, that is right. And I think that your experience in India it bears some investigation. I really think that there are very low rates of the coronavirus problem. Now, I think I would like to suggest that a lot of that is attributed to the kind of diet that the average Indian is consuming.
That's correct. Well, Thank you so much, Dr. Campbell. It's been a singular pleasure. We're looking forward to a great year for you as well, and the rest of the world, hopefully, with better nutrition.
Thank you again.
Thank you so much.